I never thought I'd witness the moment when justice would arrive with sirens blazing and federal badges flashing. But that's exactly what happened on a humid Tuesday afternoon in downtown Memphis. I'm Detective Maria Santos, and I've been working law enforcement for 15 years. I thought I'd seen everything until I watched 3 of my fellow officers make the biggest mistake of their careers and their lives. It started as a routine patrol day. I was finishing up paperwork at the precinct when the call came in about a disturbance at Riverside Shopping Center. 3 units were dispatched, including officers Jake Morrison, Brad Chen, and rookie cop Danny Walsh. I knew all 3 of them, worked alongside them for years. Morrison was a 20-year veteran with commendations for bravery. Chen had just made sergeant. Walsh was fresh out of the academy, eager to prove himself. What none of us knew that day was that we were about to become part of a federal investigation that had been running for 18 months. An investigation that would expose corruption so deep it reached the highest levels of our department. An investigation that centered around one 17-year-old kid who these officers thought was just another easy target. I arrived at the shopping center about 10 minutes after the initial call, expecting to help with crowd control or witness statements. Instead, I found Morrison, Chen, and Walsh standing over a black teenager who was face down on the hot asphalt with his hands zip-tied behind his back. The kid couldn't have weighed more than 140 pounds soaking wet, and he was wearing a school uniform, white polo shirt, khaki pants, the kind of outfit that screamed honor student, not criminal. But what made my blood run cold wasn't the arrest itself. It was the way the 3 officers were acting. Morrison was laughing, actually laughing, as he pressed his knee harder into the kid's back. Chen was filming the whole thing on his personal phone, making jokes about how the teenager was crying like a little girl. Walsh, the rookie, was standing guard but looking uncomfortable, like he wanted to say something but didn't have the courage. "What's the charge?" I called out as I approached the scene. Morrison looked up at me with a grin that made my stomach turn. "Shoplifting, resisting arrest, assaulting an officer. Kid's a real troublemaker, Santos. Caught him red-handed stealing from the electronics store." I looked down at the teenager, who couldn't have been more than 5'6", and was clearly terrified. His face was pressed against the asphalt, but I could see tears mixing with the blood from where his cheek had been scraped raw. Assaulting an officer. This kid. Little punk tried to run when we approached him. Chen added, still holding his phone up to record. Then he swung at Morrison when we tried to cuff him. I studied the scene more carefully. The kid's backpack was open, contents scattered across the parking lot. School textbooks, a calculator, what looked like a science project. No stolen electronics anywhere that I could see. The story wasn't adding up, but before I could ask more questions, Morrison stood up and dusted off his uniform. "Don't worry about it, Santos," he said with that same unsettling grin. "We got this handled. Just another day in paradise, right?" That's when I noticed something that changed everything. The teenager, despite being face down and zip-tied, was trying to say something. I knelt down closer to hear him. "Please," he whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. Tell them to check their radios." Check their radios. What did that mean? I looked back at Morrison, Chen, and Walsh, but they were too busy celebrating their big arrest to pay attention to what the kid was saying. Morrison was actually posing for Chen's phone camera, his boot planted next to the teenager's head like some kind of trophy photo. I glanced at my own radio, then at theirs. Everything looked normal. Standard police radios, nothing unusual. But something in the kid's voice, the desperation mixed with what sounded almost like hope. It made me take a second look. That's when I saw it. A small device, no bigger than a thumb drive, attached to Morrison's radio. It looked like standard equipment, but I'd never seen anything like it before. Chen and Walsh had identical devices on their radios too. I was about to ask Morrison about the device when the kid spoke again, louder this time. "Recording device activated 18 months ago," he said, his voice barely audible but crystal clear. "Federal surveillance operation Broken Shield. All transmissions have been monitored and recorded." The color drained from Morrison's face so fast I thought he might faint. Chen stopped filming, his hand shaking as he lowered his phone. Walsh took a step back, looking between his senior officers with growing panic in his eyes. That's when I heard the sirens. Not regular patrol car sirens, but something different. Something that sounded like the entire federal government was descending on Riverside Shopping Center. And that 17-year-old kid, still zip-tied in face, down on the asphalt, started to smile. The sirens were getting closer, and I could see Morrison's hands starting to shake. What had started as what he thought was routine police brutality was turning into something none of us had anticipated. I looked down at the teenager again, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Kid, what's your name?" I asked quietly. "Marcus," he replied, turning his head slightly so he could see me. "Marcus Williams. And Detective Santos, you might want to step back. Things are about to get very complicated." How did this kid know my name? I'd never seen him before in my life, and I hadn't introduced myself. But before I could ask, Morrison grabbed my arm and pulled me aside. "Santos, we need to get this kid processed and booked before anyone else shows up," he said urgently. "This arrest is clean. Solid charges, witnesses, the whole 9 yards." I looked at Morrison's face and saw something I'd never seen before in 15 years of working with him, pure panic. "Jake, what's really going on here? What did this kid actually do?" Chen stepped closer and I noticed he'd turned off his phone. "Maria, you need to trust us on this one. This kid is connected to some serious people. Gang affiliations, drug connections, the works. We can't let him walk." But none of that explained the federal surveillance equipment attached to their radios, or how Marcus knew my name, or why he seemed so confident despite being in zip ties. I was about to demand real answers when the first FBI vehicle rounded the corner into the shopping center parking lot. It wasn't just one car. It was a convoy. 3 black SUVs, 2 unmarked sedans, and what looked like a mobile command unit. The vehicles moved with military precision, surrounding our position in less than 30 seconds. I counted at least 12 agents emerging from the cars, all wearing tactical gear and federal identification. "What the hell?" Walsh muttered, but Morrison cut him off. "Nobody says anything," Morrison hissed. "Not one word until we have lawyers present." The lead FBI agent approached us with purpose. She was tall, professional, and carried herself with the kind of authority that made it clear she was in charge of whatever operation was unfolding. Her badge identified her as Special Agent Rebecca Torres. "Officers Morrison, Chen, and Walsh," she said, her voice carrying across the parking lot. "You're under arrest for violation of civil rights under color of law, conspiracy to commit fraud, and obstruction of a federal investigation." I watched as the color drained completely from Morrison's face. Chen actually took a step backward, looking around as if he was planning to run. Walsh just stood there, mouth open, clearly having no idea what was happening. "Ma'am, I think there's been some kind of mistake," Morrison said, trying to project his usual confidence, but failing miserably. "We're just processing a routine arrest here. Shoplifting suspect, standard procedure." Agent Torres looked down at Marcus, who was still tied on the ground, then back at Morrison. "Officer Morrison, you've been under federal surveillance for 18 months. Every conversation, every illegal arrest, every payoff, every instance of excessive force has been recorded and documented. The routine arrest you're processing right now is of a 17-year-old honor student who's been working as a federal informant." The world seemed to stop spinning. Marcus Williams wasn't a random teenager they'd decided to harass. He was a federal informant who had been gathering evidence against corrupt police officers for a year and a half. And Morrison, Chen, and Walsh had just walked directly into a federal trap. "That's impossible," Chen stammered. "He's just a kid. We caught him stealing from Radio Shack." Agent Torres gestured to one of her team members who approached with a tablet computer. "Officer Chen, would you like to see the surveillance footage from Radio Shack for the past 2 hours? The footage that shows Marcus Williams making a purchase with his own debit card, receiving a receipt, and walking out of the store legally. Or would you prefer to see the footage of you and your partners planting stolen merchandise in his backpack after you forced him to the ground. I felt sick to my stomach. I'd worked alongside these men for years. I'd trusted them, respected them, considered them friends. And now I was watching them get arrested for crimes I never would have believed they were capable of committing. Detective Santos, Agent Torres turned to me. You're not under arrest, but I need to inform you that you're now a material witness in a federal case. Everything you've observed here today will be part of the evidence against these officers. I nodded, still trying to process what was happening. Agent Torres, how long has this investigation been going on? 18 months, she replied. We received reports of systematic civil rights violations, excessive force, and evidence tampering involving multiple officers in this precinct. Marcus volunteered to help us gather evidence after his older brother was beaten so severely by police that he spent 3 weeks in the hospital. I looked down at Marcus, who was finally being helped to his feet by FBI agents. The zip ties were cut away, and I could see the angry red marks they'd left on his wrists. Despite everything he'd been through, despite being face down on hot asphalt while 3 grown men laughed at his pain, he maintained his dignity as he stood up and brushed off his school uniform. Ma'am, Marcus said to Agent Torres, I believe Officers Morrison and Chen also discussed their protection racket while my recording device was active. They mentioned collecting payments from 3 local businesses in exchange for security services. Morrison lunged toward Marcus, but 2 FBI agents immediately restrained him. You little piece of garbage! Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed the careers of good cops who were trying to clean up this neighborhood. Agent Torres stepped between Morrison and Marcus. Officer Morrison, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. As I watched 3 officers I'd worked with for years get loaded into federal vehicles, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my department, my colleagues, and my own role in law enforcement was about to change forever. Marcus Williams, the 17-year-old honor student who'd risked his safety to expose police corruption, looked at me with eyes that seemed much older than his years. Detective Santos, he said quietly, there's more, a lot more. And some of it involves officers you probably trust even more than you trusted them. Agent Torres gestured for me to follow her to the mobile command unit while other agents finished processing Morrison, Chen, and Walsh. Inside the vehicle was sophisticated surveillance equipment, multiple computer screens, and file cabinets that looked like they contained enough evidence to take down half the police force. Detective Santos, what I'm about to show you is classified federal evidence. Agent Torres began, settling behind one of the computer terminals. But given your position in the department and your clean record, we're hoping you might be able to help us understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. She pulled up a file labeled Arapanayom Arkansas Piesa Onan Arrests. The screen filled with photographs, audio files, and surveillance footage dating back almost 2 years. I recognized faces immediately, not just Morrison, Chen, and Walsh, but other officers from my precinct. Detectives I'd worked cases with, even some supervisory staff. Marcus isn't our only informant, Agent Torres continued. We've had 5 different sources working inside various operations run by corrupt officers in your department. What started as an investigation into excessive force complaints became something much larger when we discovered organized criminal activity. She clicked on an audio file dated 3 months earlier. Morrison's voice filled the small space, clear and unmistakable. The beauty of this system is that we're not just taking bribes to look the other way. We're actually creating the crimes, then offering protection from prosecution. It's genius, really. We arrest some random kid on fake charges, his family pays us to make it go away, and then we've got them on the hook for ongoing payments. My stomach turned as I listened to Morrison describe their operation with casual pride. How many families were they extorting? At least 40, 7 that we can document. Agent Torres replied, mostly minority families in low-income neighborhoods. People who couldn't afford real lawyers. People who were afraid to challenge police authority. People who thought paying was their only option to protect their children. She brought up another screen showing financial records. Bank accounts, cash transactions, property purchases, all connected to Morrison, Chen, and several other officers whose names made my heart sink. These weren't just bad cops taking occasional bribes. This was an organized criminal enterprise operating inside our police department. Detective Santos, I need to ask you some direct questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you ever been approached by any of these officers about participating in the books activities, special assignments, private security work, anything that seemed unusual? I thought carefully before answering. No, never. But I have to admit, I noticed that certain officers seemed to have more money than their salaries would support. Expensive cars, nice houses, vacation trips. I assumed they had other sources of income, family money or side businesses. Agent Torres nodded. That's exactly what they wanted people to think. But Detective Santos, the corruption goes deeper than just these three officers. We have evidence suggesting that supervisory staff, possibly even command-level personnel, were aware of these activities and may have been facilitating them. She pulled up a new set of files, and I saw names that made my blood run cold. Lieutenant Patricia Vance, my direct supervisor for the past 5 years. Captain Robert Hayes, who'd been my mentor when I first made detective. Even Deputy Chief Thomas Crawford, who I'd always respected as one of the most ethical leaders in the department. No, I said firmly. There's no way Lieutenant Vance or Captain Hayes were involved in this. I've worked closely with both of them. They're good cops, honest cops. Agent Torres looked at me with sympathy. Detective Santos, I understand how difficult this must be. But I need you to listen to something. She played another audio file, this one recorded just 2 weeks earlier. Lieutenant Vance's voice was clear and businesslike. Morrison, we've got a problem with the Williams family. The kid's been asking too many questions about his brother's arrest. His mother went to internal affairs last week, and now they're opening a formal investigation. Morrison's response was chilling. Don't worry about it, Lieutenant. We'll handle the kid. Maybe it's time he learned what happens when people don't appreciate the protection we provide to this community. I felt like I was going to be sick. Lieutenant Vance, the woman who'd supported my promotion to detective, who'd written commendation letters for my work, had been part of a conspiracy to intimidate and possibly harm a teenage informant. There's more, Agent Torres said quietly, bringing up surveillance footage from inside our own precinct. We've had cameras recording conversations in the break room, the parking garage, even some of the interview rooms. What we discovered is that this corruption involves approximately 60% of the patrol division and 30% of the detective bureau. The footage showed officers I knew and trusted discussing criminal activities like they were planning weekend barbecues, casual conversations about which families were behind on their protection payments, which neighborhoods needed to be reminded, about cooperation, which arrests could be fabricated to maintain their control over the community. Detective Santos, Agent Torres continued, based on our investigation, you appear to be one of the few clean officers left in your precinct. That's why we're showing you this evidence. We need your help to understand how this operation functioned day to day, and we need your testimony to prosecute the officers we've identified. I stared at the screens full of evidence, trying to process the magnitude of what had been happening right under my nose. How did I not see this? How did I work alongside these people for years and never realize what they were doing? Because they were very careful to compartmentalize their activities. Agent Torres explained. Clean officers like you were deliberately excluded from certain operations, kept away from specific cases, given assignments that wouldn't expose you to their criminal behavior. They needed legitimate cops around to maintain the appearance of a functioning police department. She pulled up Marcus Williams' file, and I saw photographs of him from the past 18 months. A kid who looked like he belonged in honors classes, not federal investigations. Marcus volunteered for this operation after watching his family get extorted for 6 months. His brother was beaten during a fake arrest. His mother was threatened when she tried to file complaints. And his father lost his job after Morrison made calls to his employer claiming he was under investigation for drug dealing. Why didn't they just leave town? I asked. Where would they go? Agent Torres replied, This family has lived in Memphis for 3 generations. Their entire extended family, their community, their church, everything they've built is here. And Marcus knew that if his family ran away, these officers would just find other victims. He decided to fight back. She showed me recordings of Marcus meeting with FBI agents, learning how to use surveillance equipment, practicing how to provoke the corrupt officers into revealing their criminal activities. For 18 months, this 17-year-old kid had been risking his life to gather evidence against some of the most dangerous criminals in the city. Criminals who happened to wear police badges. The device attached to their radios. I said, remembering what I'd noticed during the arrest. How long has that been recording them? 6 months? Agent Torres replied. Marcus developed a friendship with Officer Walsh's younger sister, who goes to the same high school. During a study session at Walsh's house, Marcus was able to plant the devices while the officers were in another room. Every conversation, every radio transmission, every criminal conspiracy has been recorded and stored on federal servers. I looked through more of the surveillance footage and saw myself in several scenes, completely oblivious to the criminal activity happening around me. There I was, working cases with Morrison, having lunch with Lieutenant Vance, attending briefings with Captain Hayes, all while they were running a criminal enterprise that was terrorizing the community I'd sworn to protect. Agent Torres, what happens now? To the department, to the clean officers, to the community. That depends partly on you, she said. We're preparing to make approximately 20 more arrests over the next 48 hours. We'll need officers we can trust to help maintain basic law enforcement services while we clean house. We'll need witnesses who can testify about the culture that allowed this corruption to flourish. And we'll need people who can help rebuild community trust after this investigation becomes public. I thought about Marcus Williams, face down on hot asphalt while 3 officers laughed at his pain, and I realized he'd shown more courage in one afternoon than I'd shown in 15 years of supposedly serving and protecting. What do you need me to do? I asked. Agent Torres smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Help us finish what Marcus started. Help us make sure that what happened to his family never happens to anyone else. As we prepared to leave the mobile command unit, I saw Marcus through the window, giving his statement to federal agents. He was still wearing his school uniform, still looked like the honor student he was, but now I understood that he was also something else entirely. He was the bravest person I'd ever met, and he'd just brought down the most dangerous criminal organization in Memphis, one that had been hiding behind police badges for years. Over the next 24 hours, I watched my entire world collapse and rebuild itself in ways I never could have imagined. Agent Torres had asked me to continue my normal duties while wearing a federal recording device, and what I discovered about my own department made the Morrison situation look like petty theft. The morning after the arrests, I walked into the precinct to find chaos. Word had already spread that 3 officers had been taken into federal custody, but nobody knew the full scope of the investigation. Lieutenant Vance called an emergency briefing, and I sat in that room watching her address the assembled officers, knowing that she was about to be arrested herself. People, we have a situation, Lieutenant Vance began, her voice carrying the authority I'd always respected. 3 of our officers were detained yesterday by federal agents. We don't have complete information yet, but it appears they're being investigated for civil rights violations. She paused, scanning the room, and I noticed her eyes lingering on certain officers, the same ones whose names had appeared in Agent Torres' files. I want everyone to understand that this department has 0 tolerance for misconduct. If any of you have information about inappropriate behavior by fellow officers, now is the time to come forward. It was a masterful performance. Lieutenant Vance positioned herself as the ethical leader trying to clean up problems caused by rogue officers, when in reality she was trying to assess how much the FBI knew and whether any other officers might be cooperating with the investigation. After the briefing, Captain Hayes approached me in the hallway, Santos, I need you to take over Morrison's active cases. Can you handle the extra workload? Of course, Captain, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite knowing that this man I'd admired for years was likely part of the criminal conspiracy. Good, and Maria, if anyone approaches you asking questions about Morrison or his activities, I want you to refer them directly to me. The media is going to be all over this story, and we need to control the narrative. Control the narrative. 2 hours later, as I sat in my car listening to Agent Torres through my earpiece, I understood what that really meant. Hayes wasn't trying to protect the department's reputation. He was trying to cover up evidence of his own criminal activities. Detective Santos, we need you to accept an assignment from Captain Hayes. Agent Torres instructed. Hayes going to ask you to review evidence from cases Morrison handled over the past year. We need you to document everything you find, especially anything that looks like fabricated reports or planted evidence. Sure enough, Hayes called me into his office that afternoon and handed me a box of case files. Maria, I need a thorough review of Morrison's work. Make sure all the paperwork is in order, all the evidence is properly documented. We can't afford to have cases thrown out because of sloppy police work. I took the box back to my desk and began what turned out to be the most disturbing research of my career. Case after case showed the same pattern. Young minority suspects arrested on charges that made no sense, evidence that appeared after the initial arrest reports, witness statements that contradicted video footage, and plea agreements that required ongoing payments to community service organizations that didn't seem to exist. The Marcus Williams case wasn't unique. It was just the latest in a series of systematic civil rights violations designed to generate income for corrupt officers. I found records of at least 30 families who had been extorted over the past 2 years, paying thousands of dollars to make fake charges disappear. But the most shocking discovery came when I cross-referenced the case files with our department's financial records. The community service organizations that received payments from plea agreements were all connected to shell companies owned by police officers. Morrison, Chen, Walsh, Lieutenant Vance, Captain Hayes, and 6 other officers had been using fake charities to launder money from their extortion scheme. Agent Torres, I said into my recording device, I've found evidence of money laundering through fraudulent charitable organizations. The scope of this operation is much larger than we thought. Her response came through my earpiece. Excellent work, Detective. Can you photograph the financial documents without being observed? I spent the rest of the afternoon carefully documenting evidence while maintaining the appearance of routine case review. Every photograph, every document, every piece of evidence would help federal prosecutors build cases against officers I'd worked beside for years. That evening, I received a text message from Lieutenant Vance. Maria, need to meet with you tonight. Important discussion about Morrison's situation. Meet me at Riverside Park at 9 p.m. Come alone. I forwarded the message to Agent Torres immediately. Her response was swift. This could be an attempt to intimidate or eliminate a potential witness. We'll have surveillance teams in position, but Detective Santos, you need to understand that you're now in significant danger. As I drove to Riverside Park that night, wearing a wire and knowing that federal agents were monitoring my every move, I thought about Marcus Williams. This 17-year-old kid had been doing exactly what I was doing now, but without the protection of federal agents, without backup, without anyone knowing where he was or what risks he was taking. Lieutenant Vance was waiting for me at a picnic table near the river, and in the dim lighting, she looked different somehow. Older, more tired, less like the confident supervisor I'd always known. Maria, thank you for coming, she said as I approached. We need to talk about your future with this department. What do you mean? Vance looked around nervously, then leaned forward across the table. The federal investigation is going to destroy this department. Good cops are going to lose their careers because of a few bad actors, but it doesn't have to destroy your career. I sat down across from her, my recording device capturing every word. Lieutenant, I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting that you have choices to make. Vance replied, You can cooperate with the federal investigation and watch your career end when this department gets disbanded and restructured. Or you can help us limit the damage and come out of this as one of the survivors. Help you how? Vance's voice dropped to a whisper. The feds are relying on testimony from criminals and troublemakers. People like Marcus Williams, who have grudges against good police officers. Your testimony could contradict their claims, could show that Morrison and the others were just doing their jobs in a difficult environment. I felt sick to my stomach. Lieutenant Vance was asking me to lie in federal court, to help cover up civil rights violations and extortion, to protect criminals who happen to wear police badges. Lieutenant, I reviewed Morrison's case files today. The evidence suggests systematic violations of constitutional rights, fabricated charges, and financial crimes. I can't testify that those activities were legitimate police work. Vance's demeanor changed instantly. The friendly supervisor disappeared, replaced by someone cold and threatening. Maria, you need to be very careful about the choices you make. This community needs police officers who understand loyalty, who don't betray their fellow cops for the approval of federal bureaucrats. Is that a threat? It's a reality check, Vance replied. Good cops protect each other. They don't help destroy the careers of officers who are trying to keep dangerous neighborhoods safe. I stood up from the table, and Vance grabbed my wrist. Where are you going? Home. I need to think about what you've said. Vance's grip tightened. Maria, I hope you make the right decision. It would be terrible if something happened to derail your promising career. As I drove away from Riverside Park, Agent Torres' voice came through my earpiece. Outstanding work, Detective. You just recorded Lieutenant Vance attempting to suborn perjury and making veiled threats against a federal witness. We'll have arrest warrants ready by morning. The next day, I watched from my office window as FBI agents led Lieutenant Vance out of the precinct in handcuffs. Captain Hayes was arrested an hour later. By noon, Deputy Chief Crawford had been suspended pending investigation. Marcus Williams called me that afternoon. Detective Santos, I wanted to thank you for what you're doing. I know it's not easy to turn against people you trusted. Marcus, I should be thanking you, I replied. You risked everything to expose these crimes. You showed more courage at 17 than most adults show in their entire lives. I had to, he said simply. My brother is still recovering from what they did to him. My mother still has nightmares about the threats they made. Someone had to stand up to them, and it turned out that someone was me. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Marcus Williams had taught me something fundamental about police work that 15 years of experience hadn't. Sometimes the most important part of serving and protecting is protecting the community from the people who claim to serve it. The investigation was far from over. More arrests were coming, more evidence was being processed, and more victims were coming forward to tell their stories. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we were actually fighting for justice instead of just wearing the uniforms that represented it. 6 months later, I stood in federal court watching Marcus Williams testify against the final group of corrupt officers from our department. He wore a suit that was probably borrowed for the occasion, but he carried himself with the same dignity he'd shown that day on the hot asphalt when 3 grown men were laughing at his pain. "Oh, Mr. Williams," the federal prosecutor asked, "what motivated you to risk your safety to expose police corruption?" Marcus looked directly at the defendants, former officers who had terrorized his family and dozens of others. Someone had to speak for the people who couldn't speak for themselves. Someone had to show that wearing a badge doesn't make you above the law. The final verdict was decisive: 18 officers convicted on federal charges ranging from civil rights violations to racketeering. Morrison got 12 years. Lieutenant Vance got 8. Captain Hayes got 10. The total amount of restitution ordered exceeded $2 million. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming, not even the FBI. Marcus Williams wasn't just a victim who decided to fight back. During the investigation, we discovered that his older brother, the one who'd been beaten so severely, was actually an undercover federal agent who'd been investigating police corruption for 3 years before his cover was blown. The Williams family had been working with the FBI long before Morrison and his crew targeted them. Marcus's decision to become an informant wasn't just about seeking justice for his family. It was about finishing an operation his brother had started, an operation that ultimately saved dozens of families from ongoing victimization. Today, I'm a federal agent myself, transferred to the FBI after the Memphis Police Department was completely restructured. I work on police corruption cases across the country, and Marcus Williams is studying criminal justice at the University of Memphis on a full scholarship funded by the civil settlement from his family's lawsuit. The shopping center where this all began has a memorial plaque now, honoring the courage of citizens who risk everything to expose corruption in law enforcement. I want you to think about something. How many times have you witnessed injustice and stayed silent because speaking up seemed too risky? How many Marcus Williams are out there right now, deciding whether to stand up to corrupt authority figures? Comment below if you've ever had to choose between staying safe and doing what's right. Have you ever seen abuse of power and wondered whether one person could really make a difference? Subscribe if you believe that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are teenagers who refuse to accept that. This is just how things are. Because Marcus Williams proved that courage isn't about your age or your size, it's about your willingness to stand up for what's right, even when the people you're standing up to have badges, guns, and the power to destroy your life. Sometimes justice arrives with sirens blazing, but sometimes it starts with one brave kid who decides he's not going to be a victim anymore.